this happening.
Any context, if there's an improper proceeding below, is there any context which you're saying just the fact that there was an improper proceeding means the state loses authority to null pros?
Because, Your Honor, fundamentally, the state does not have the ability to make an end run. And I think Sims is solid authority.
That's a different issue, I think. That's, as I said, I think there's two issues. The one is, was there authority if there was a defective vacatur proceeding? And the second is the fact that an appeal was filed. Does the state have the authority to null pros once an appeal is filed? I think those are two separate questions. You've raised both. And for your first argument, I'm struggling to find authority to support that argument. So that's why I'm asking if there is some.
Yeah, I'm not contending that the null pros was not otherwise in compliance with the rules. But the rules assume, hearing with findings of fact and analyzing in the Court of Appeals opinion, which I think is the most important thing here. The Court of Appeals ruled on many of these issues, and that was not analyzed. If it was analyzed, it was certainly not articulated in the opinion.
Are you talking about Sims?
Sims, Your Honor.
When you say the Court of Appeals, are you talking about Sims? Or are you talking about the Court of Appeals, Judge Green's underlying decision in this case? I'm just trying to understand.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I still am getting the hang of it. It was the appellate court.
So I'm only bringing that up because one thing about Mr. Kelly, and I do respect this about him, is that I've had a chance to read that he actually experienced a horrible tragedy when he was a teenager. He lost his sister to a crime of violence, and he's dedicated his life to speaking up for victims' rights. And I respect that. Our family, we respect that. What we take issue with is that over the past several months when we've gone to court, Mr. Kelly has never once acknowledged our family. He's never once acknowledged my mom. He's never once acknowledged my younger brother or my dad or any of us. We feel that Mr. Kelly should not have the right to pick and choose who victims are, that he should recognize all victims. And I think particularly, again, we have the utmost respect and compassion for the tragedy that he went through, and we appreciate the line of work that he's dedicated himself to doing. But what I wish he would understand is that, and what was hard for us to understand is that at that hearing, Ms. Becky Feldman, she was representing the state. So for Stephen Kelly to accuse her of not caring about victims' rights, for Stephen Kelly to essentially accuse Ms. Feldman of colluding with the judge and my attorney with having a hearing that was trampling on the rights of Hae's family, as if she doesn't care about victims' rights. There's been many articles been published about Ms. Feldman, that to say that Ms. Feldman doesn't care about victims' families, she is a victim's family. Ms. Feldman lost her brother to a crime of violence. So we just can't imagine it hurt us. We can't imagine how much it must have hurt her throughout the past year to hear essentially these arguments being made, and she was the one who handled this case, that she doesn't care about victims' families, when she herself, she is a victim's family. And we would ask that Stephen Kelly respectfully consider that when he says the things that he says publicly, that he would take our family into consideration. And so just to conclude, basically just real short, we're asking the Attorney General's office, Mr. Brown, to please conduct an investigation into these new pieces of information that we've presented. We're going to submit a letter to Mr. Brown outlining everything that we've said and making a formal request. We would just ask that Mr. Brown consider the fact that the previous administration, that the Attorney General's office is supposed to conduct itself in an unbiased and an objective way to review justice and review convictions in this case. And the Attorney General's office is not supposed to act as Kathleen Murphy's personal attorney. The Attorney General's office is not supposed to exist to protect Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urich from accountability. And we're just asking that please that they be held to the same standard that anyone else in Maryland would be. That if Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urich, if they were two young African-American boys in some urban city, they would be in jail charged with conspiracy with the amount of evidence they were able to present. So we have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Brown. He has a long history of standing up for Maryland families, and we're just asking that he please stand up for our family as well. We're not asking for any public announcement. We know there's a hearing coming up on October 5th. We respect the courts, we respect the appellate courts, and we're going to be there on October 5th. And we're going to respect whatever decision that court makes. If that court makes a decision that I have to return to prison, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in prison. And I'll be right there. As we've been for 24 years, we don't have anything to hide. We're a family. We've suffered so much, all due to a wrongful conviction that had nothing to do with Hae's murder. And we've fought so hard for all these years to try to prove that I was innocent, but also to get justice for Hae and justice for her family. And the last thing that I'll say, just to reiterate, we absolutely are not saying that Hae's family did anything wrong. Young Lee absolutely had the right to contact Kathleen, to speak to her, however that went down. He had the right to retain any lawyer that he wanted to. We support that, and we completely don't want anyone contacting Young Lee or we don't want anything to involve their family unless they want to speak about it or not. We respect that. We're only asking that the Attorney General's office speak to Mr. Stephen Kelly, Ms. Kathleen Murphy, Mr. Kevin Urich, and any other attorneys who have filed motions in this case to determine if Kathleen Murphy at the Attorney General's office was involved in the strategizing and essentially trying to protect this conviction as opposed to securing justice. So I really appreciate everybody. I'm so sorry. I know this took a long time, but I really wanted to present, as a family, we wanted to present the information so everyone can make their own judgment. I did, I put this actually as a QR code. If anyone wants to scan it, then I believe that it should, it does work. It'll pull up the PDF of the entire presentation that I just made. So if anyone wants to do that, you feel free. I'll leave it up right now. And I don't know if you guys wanted to take a break or, I'm sorry, I know it's almost 1:30. So again, I apologize for the lengthiness of this, but we'd be more than happy. We appreciate everyone coming, and we'd be more than happy to answer questions. We just ask that perhaps that, everyone gets a chance to ask their questions, if everyone could please, because it's been a couple hours. We haven't had a chance to check on my dad. So again, if you guys, I don't know if you want to take a break or we can just go right to.
5 minutes.
Yes, sir. That would be great. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. So in 5 minutes, if that's okay with everybody, yeah.
Also, police came by earlier saying that the cars are parked, kind of.
Oh, so.
Yeah.
Yikes.
So maybe like a 2-3 minute break or something.
Oh, okay. Oh, it went off? I'm sorry, yeah.
I know I parked mine like in your driveway.
Oh, yeah, so if anyone wanted to, yikes.
Let's go check on your dad so we can get finished. There's nowhere to park.
Okay, no, that's cool, yeah.
Yeah.
Mom, did you want to go check on the blue?
I should check on my husband.
Okay, yeah, so. Oh, so sorry, so I guess we won't do a 5-minute break? Maybe.
Yes, you have to go check on your dad.
Okay, my mom's going to go check on my dad, so. I'll be happy to. Okay, do a quick break. Okay, cool. All right, stop. Okay.
Adnan, how old are you? 43?
I'm 42 now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, am I?
Oh yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah, I don't really need them anymore. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your advice. Thank you. Oh yes, sir. That's right there.
Yeah, no worries.
I saw the video of me.
I just said I was looking at everyone I knew. I was like, I know that person. I know.
The video was like this sketching.
Oh yes, sir. Yeah. Sorry, I think we're going to move to the couch maybe first.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, sir.
We're gonna move this back, but I think we need to move the camera.
Yeah, it's cool, because I got a number. Inshallah, I won't move these again. It really means so much that you're here. Thank you so much. Yeah, man. How you doing? You're from the Baltimore Beach?
Yeah, I'm
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so sorry. Oh, you're Lisa Snowden. Oh, that's awesome. I was trying to reach out to different people.
Juvenile told me.
Oh, that's awesome. No, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that she told you. It was hard to get numbers and contact information from
Do you
different
have a
people.
contact just so I can
Yes,
make sure
ma'am.
that y'all don't have
give you. I'll tell you what. I'll just show it to you because I'm mic'd up. That way you can just have it privately. Oh, can I key it into your phone? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Oh, you good? Oh, yeah.
No, I'm so glad that you came. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's a short notice too.
No,
Oh,
I
maybe
wanted
should
to
I
make
write my
sure
name
that I
or-
was here. Oh, no, I know.
Okay, yes, ma'am. All right, thank you so much, ma'am. I really appreciate it. I'm really great. My family's really grateful to everybody for coming out. Thank you.
Stay in there. All right.
killing me.
No, I just think it's hard, man. I got away so messed up. Luckily, it brought us together. It's a good writing was a challenge. But I mean, that's fine. Uh-oh, who did that? Did you use it at all?
Well, here's what I did with it. Corey went down and so I pulled out on a story and put on passport. You know, if I needed some more video.
Do you need me to sit right here? Should I sit over there? I can sit wherever you want me to.
No, you're perfect right there.
My mom might not come back. She might be taking care of my dad. We could start, and if Yusuf comes back, they might actually both be taking care of him. So yeah, we might just go. I guess I could just answer questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
Are you sure they won't be coming back? Should we wait?
I don't think they'll come back. They may or may not, because my dad's been up there for a while. So just, especially with the police, they're gonna say stuff about people's cars. Yeah.
Okay.
So we could start. Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Yeah?
Yeah, no, I knew we had it.
How many more minutes?
Yeah, so I'm thinking we should go ahead and start. My mom and my younger brother, they might be tending to my dad, and I know if the police, they come by again, you know, everyone's cars, and people might be coming back from work and stuff, so
Okay.
I'll just answer questions myself, and
You
then,
might even move that over, if he's sleeping in the middle.
Oh, that was the microphone.
Can you move
Yes.
the microphones or you slide
You can come to the
come to the
come to the
middle.
middle, yeah. Just right.
Unless my mom, are they coming? Oh, no, okay.
I can have it if you need to move in.
Give me the movie.
Yeah, come over to
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Because he can see where you.
Okay, cool.
He's
yeah,
comfortable where
yeah,
you.
that's cool, thank
You're
you.
comfortable where you're at.
No, ma'am, I appreciate it, thank you so much. And just in case
Is
if
that
you do
okay?
come
Don't
back-
block you in too
No,
much.
yes, ma'am, that's perfect, thank you so
Okay,
much, yeah.
very
I'm good, I'm good, I'm good.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. All right, so I guess just please keep in mind that, you know, like, we kind of agreed on, like, maybe two. I do appreciate people have a lot of questions, and I'll be making myself available. I had a chance to make contact with, I think, quite a few people in this room, and also the news directors. So my family and I, one of the reasons why we're speaking out now is because just for the past 24 years, we've really just kind of kept our heads down and just kind of really kind of trusted to work on the system and tried to do essentially everything that we could. And we've never really spoken out. I know myself, I've never done an interview just over all these years. So we just feel like now is a time to speak out and just to kind of have our voices heard and to make this appeal, you know, to the Mr. Brown. So, yeah, so I guess, so it's probably just be us two. My mom, she's tending to my dad. I don't think she'll be able to make it back down here in the time allotted, so.
Mr. Syed?
Yes, sir.
How do you prepare yourself mentally for the possibility that you may have to go back to prison?
So, no, and I appreciate that question. Thank you so much. I think initially, I do understand that there have been arguments made to the court that if my conviction is reinstated and if the Supreme Court does decide that, you know, to have a redo of the hearing, that it would be very difficult to come up with a legal mechanism to keep me out of prison. Because essentially the reason why I was out when my conviction was vacated, I was out on a pretrial motion, essentially like a bail, except it wasn't a cash bail, it was like home monitor. For my conviction to be reinstated, there's no legal mechanism, from what I understand, and I'm not a lawyer obviously, but there's really no legal mechanism to keep me out of prison. That when the mandate is issued, I would have to turn myself back in, which I absolutely would. You know, I absolutely would. As far as to your question, sir, personally, I think more so, like for me, I've spent more time in prison than I haven't. You know, I'm fortunate actually that like the friends and brothers of my life are in prison. You know, the people whom as much as I enjoy being out here with my brother and my mother and my family and the people who care about me, there's always just a huge part of me that the friends and brothers of my life, they're still in prison. And sometimes I'm able to talk to them. And so for me, going back to prison, as horrible as it would be for me as a person to lose my freedom, I'd be returning to a place where at least I'd have the support of people whom I care about so much and who care about me. So for me, in that situation, I can deal with that. And I know also for me just to have a sense of belief in the truth, I know I had nothing to do with Hae's murder, that I'm absolutely an innocent person. And I've always fought hard, and we've always fought hard to find justice for Hae and to prove who is responsible for it. So I would keep my faith in that. And that's what's held me intact for all these years. But having said that, that's easy for me to say. But what about the pain and suffering that it causes my younger brother, that it causes my mother, and that it causes my father? And we feel that respectfully, their suffering has never been considered. Their suffering is never discussed. What is it, especially, it's been talked about publicly, not just my dad's health, but my mom's health. She's just the bravest, strongest person that we know. Many people who don't know, she's the survivor of cancer, and her cancer went into remission, but it very easily could return. And probably the greatest fear that anyone in prison, and I think the general public had a chance to experience it during COVID, is that you would lose a family member, or a family member would become ill, and they're in the hospital and you can't see them. You can't be with them. So amongst everything else, the thing I'm grateful for the most is that I'm able to be here with my mom and with my dad. And who knows, just as human beings, we know that all lives come to an end. And that at least now, if something happens to them, I can be there. So the thing that I would say is the most, I guess the hardest thing to wrap my mind around is, what if I was to go back to prison and the greatest fear that I've ever had, my mother and father passing away, and now I'm still in there. And then that's not even speaking about the harm and the emotional suffering that it causes them. For the past year, every single day we wake up thinking, what if Adnan has to go back to prison? And if my mom was here, she could speak to it even more. It's something that keeps her up at night. Every single night people call her and they tell her they're so happy that I'm home, but she knows in her heart that at any moment I could be taken away again. So if she was to be here, that's what she would tell you. And maybe Yusuf can speak to it, how he feels, but...
Yeah, my mom, she asks a lot about will Adnan go back to jail. So I have to tell her that no, it's not possible, but it's a very strong possibility. But I have to lie to her for her, for her own sanity. And it's just, if it does happen, I mean, it's gonna kill her. I know it's gonna kill her and my dad. And it reminds me of when I was young and my brother went away, and I would have to come home and see my mom crying. So it's kind of like a reminder that sometimes I'll catch her on the sofa being sad because she's scared that he might go back.
So yes, sir. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Syed, whatever happened with the Juvenile Restoration Act hearing that you were having?
Yes, sir. No, thank you. So I guess we're so thankful that the Maryland legislators passed this act. So many of the guys that I grew up with and the friends and brothers that I have, and when I describe them, I know there's an idea of people in prison. We see these stories on TV about someone, who commits a horrible murder. They kill their family, they kill their children for the insurance money or because they're involved in an affair or something. And we think that these are the people who are in prison. In my experience, it's not, though. I know in the state of Maryland, the vast majority of people that I know in prison, who I come and I care about and I respect, and I'm fortunate to have their love and support, they went to prison as teenagers. They went to prison at a young age. And they come from backgrounds where they never had a chance. I'm fortunate. I'm so fortunate. I'm like an exception. I grew up in a household with parents who loved me, who cared about me, who were there to support me with everything that I needed. The vast majority of my friends and brothers who were in prison, they grew up in no-parent households. They grew up in the inner city, and no one ever checked to see if they had food to eat, if their little brother or sister had diapers. And in many of these situations, they gravitate towards older people who are involved in different illicit activities making money. So now at this young age, they see my little brother doesn't have diapers, my sister doesn't have any formula, I don't know where my mom is, I don't know who my dad is. So I'm going to go with these older guys and make some money to be able to take care of my family. And it's not necessary, it's more nuanced than that. But I mentioned this in response to your question because we were so grateful that the Maryland legislature would pass this law because it gave people who were under the age of 18 when they were arrested a chance. It gave them a second chance. It gave a person an opportunity 20 years later to go in front of a court and say, this thing that happened when I was a kid, it was something that either I didn't do, because a person can still continue to fight for their innocence, or they can say, I did do it, and I'm so sorry, and I've spent the past 20 years of my life trying everything that I can to rehabilitate myself and to be a better person. And they can present that information to a judge. And honestly, it's just like the best thing in the world because so many guys that I know, and ladies too that I don't know, but they've also benefited, they've been able to go to court when they never had a chance before and present their case to a judge. And the judge looked at their records. And I don't know the exact number, but I think it's like 30 or 40. and thankful to the attorneys at the public defender's office who've been fighting these cases, and they've been able to secure release for so many individuals who are deserving of a second chance. So for me personally, when they initially was filed as a JRA, once the state's attorney's office did a complete file review and discovered the Brady violation, it morphed into a motion to vacate the sentence. So I never had a JRA hearing, but technically it would still be available to me. Additionally, what would be available to me if I was sent back to prison would be, along with this hearing, would be the motion for post-conviction DNA testing. Essentially, it's a motion that can be filed to discover that there's DNA that's exculpatory of the defendant. So fortunately, in this case, there was DNA that was found on significant pieces of evidence. And I understand that there's been a lot of discussion about, well, how important was the DNA that was found? And if a person, number one, if you would just consider that this was your family member, God forbid, or someone that you cared about deeply, and to know the details of this, all the police reports indicate from witness statements that when Hae left school on January 13th, she was wearing a pair of black shoes, like dress shoes, high heel shoes. All the witness reports and the police statements say that. The police statements, they say that when Hae was found, she was not wearing shoes. And the police statements say that in her car, the back seat of her car, or somewhere in her car, they found this pair of shoes. So these shoes fit the description of what she was wearing the day that she left school, and the fact that these were shoes that were not found. So any person, if this was your mother, if this was your sister, if this was your niece, God forbid, anyone would feel that that DNA on those shoes is important. Because surely no one would take their shoes off in the middle of winter and drive around, or whatever the circumstances were. So no one would doubt the importance of a piece of evidence like that. So I mention all this to say that with regards to the motion to file for post-conviction DNA testing, we believe that, well, we know that motion was never ruled on because it was changed to a motion to vacate. So that motion is still pending. So if I was to have to go back to prison, we have initially this motion to vacate, but we also have additional motions. So for me personally, I take comfort in that, but that's easy for me to say. It's a different story when it comes to my family. How do I explain that to my mother? That I may have to go back, but I don't know for how long. Maybe they'll do another hearing. If not, we'll do this other hearing. You know, so yes, sir, to answer your question.
Mr. Syed, I'm gonna
Yes, ma'am.
try to, you clearly know so much more about the law and the process than probably any of us in this room. So I'm gonna ask this question on behalf of the people, the regular
Yes, ma'am.
people who watch it. And so you presented a lot of evidence that there may have been improper action by the trial prosecutors in securing the appeals ruling that overturned the
Yes, ma'am.
overturning of the. I'm not saying it right. But what I don't understand is the battle between the victim's rights and your due process rights. And I don't get how, if the state says, or the city prosecutor says, we don't believe this is right, we couldn't retry this case, we want to overturn or vacate this. If they say there's no case against you, how can they send you back to prison and reinstate your conviction based on what sounds like a judge's maybe administrative decision on when to hold, like a calendar date on when to hold? I don't understand it. And how are the two intertwined? Is it because they were at the same hearing? I know it doesn't make sense. Can anyone help me through? I don't understand how they could reinstate your conviction and send you back because of the way the court or the judge scheduled the hearing last year.
No, yes, ma'am. I appreciate the question. Thank you for asking it. I definitely, I think from the beginning, like I would say that my family and I, we have great respect for the appellate courts. Even if we would respectfully disagree with the decision, we've always been respectful of the courts, and whatever the courts say, we've accepted that. And we obviously retain our rights to appeal and things of that nature. So as far as the recent court ruling, because it's still being litigated, I want to be respectful of the courts and the fact that it's in front of the high court. So I guess I don't want to get too much into the details of that. But what I would say is that we absolutely believe in victims' rights. We absolutely believe that crime victims' families should be treated with the utmost respect and dignity. And they should be allowed not just everything that the law allows, but that they should be treated in like the highest manner possible. They should be allowed the opportunity to be at hearings and everything like that. We believe that. and we support that. I think particularly because we know what it's like to suffer ourselves. We know what it's like to be essentially just the victims of what's happened in this case, except that our suffering has never really been acknowledged. And it's characteristic of wrongful conviction cases that, and the focus should be on the family of the person who's deceased, and we respect that. But it typically, a lot of times in these wrongful conviction cases, the family of the person who is innocent is always ignored, and their suffering is never mentioned. So for us, I think, we just wish that anyone who's involved in looking at this case from a judicial level, we would just ask and we would plead to take our suffering into consideration, number one. And number two, the reason why we're asking the Attorney General's office, Mr. Brown, to open an investigation into these actions is to reiterate again, not to have anything involving Hae's family, but because we believe that the past year of litigation has not been about victims' rights. We believe that this past year of litigation has been about protecting Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Yerrick from accountability. Because the reality of it is that an investigation into their behavior, unless hopefully the Attorney General opens this investigation, it'll never happen if I'm back in prison. It'll just never happen. So the point is that it'll never happen as long as the conviction is secured. If the conviction remains, then essentially that's an argument that they did the right thing. So for a conviction to be vacated in a wrongful conviction case, it either happens because it was just purely a mistake, and that the prosecutors, and to be clear, like my family, we have a tremendous amount of respect for prosecutors and the authorities. We believe that they serve a very valuable purpose, in our community, in our country. So we don't take issue with prosecutors. I think particularly as a family of Americans that happen to be Muslim, we know what it's like to be blamed for the actions of a few. We know what it's like to suffer those consequences. And we hope that we would never, ever be the type of people who would blame an entire group of people, an entire segment, on the actions of a few. So we have a tremendous amount of respect for prosecutors and detectives and everything like that. It's just that we're saying that the ones in our case, and we feel like we've demonstrated through the evidence that we're just asking for accountability to be placed upon them because of the actions that they've taken. So as far as, we don't believe that, we absolutely believe in victims' rights and that they should be considered and held up to the highest standard. We believe that the past year of litigation has been masquerading as victims' rights, but it's not. It's been all about protecting Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Yerrick from accountability.
Sir, can you speak to why you yourself called this press conference today, why we're not hearing these allegations through an attorney?
Well, yes, ma'am, and I appreciate that question. So, like I said, we don't have a lot of means. We don't have a lot of, money or anything like that. And we've been fortunate to be represented, just in the past, I'd say 13, 14 years, by two really amazing attorneys. First attorney, his name was Justin Brown. He wasn't just a great attorney. He became a very close family friend. And he was one of the first people who was here the night that I got released to give my mom a hug, my dad a hug, him a hug, and to give me a hug. So we know that Justin Brown would be here in a heartbeat if we asked him to, and he would be doing this. We're really fortunate that we have an attorney. I have an attorney now named Miss Erica Suter, and I'm so grateful that the Office of the Public Defender and the University of Baltimore Innocence Project Law School Clinic, that they are also helping to represent. And Miss Suter is the exact same way. She's become our close family friend. She's someone who just has the most amazing reputation. So and she would be here in a heartbeat if we asked her to. So the reason, for so many years, our family has never spoken up. We've never said anything. And we've always relied on our attorneys to speak up for us. And they've done such an amazing job of it. But we look at it that, not just being American, but that we're Marylanders. Our family, we've lived here our whole lives. My mom and dad chose this state to make a life with probably 50 years ago. My dad worked for the state of Maryland for almost 30 years. My mom, she owns and operates a small daycare in this business. So for us as Marylanders, we feel that we have a right to speak out as a family and to appeal to our Attorney General. He's our Attorney General. Mr. Brown, he works essentially to protect the right of Maryland families. And we feel that for us to appeal to him directly, it's almost as if a person was to, and I appreciate the question, it's almost as if a person would go to the police department and you want to file a police report and you want to say my rights were violated, a crime was committed against me, that, I'm coming to you as a citizen to report this crime. So we kind of feel like we shouldn't have to get an attorney. And I do appreciate the question. We shouldn't have to have an attorney to go to our Attorney General to essentially report a crime, to present a series of information to say, respectfully, sir, our rights were violated. We're asking that you please investigate it. So that would be the reason why we're so grateful to have the attorneys that we have and the attorneys that we did have. And we know that they'd be here in a heartbeat if we asked them. But we also know that just as a family, there comes a time where we just want to speak up for ourselves and have the opportunity to address, not just the public, but Mr. Brown, and to please ask him to please open an investigation into these matters. But thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Mr. Syed, you mentioned now several times that not only do you want to clear your name, but you also want to get justice for Hae Min Lee. So I'm curious, just how do you think that these allegations of misconduct might eventually lead to getting justice, if they would at all?
So I think, what's most important actually is that, like you said, along with proving that I'm innocent to get justice for Hae, any wrongfully convicted person, I think, has the experience that the only way that an investigation begins into who's truly responsible is that it has to be determined that the person actually was wrongfully convicted. Number one, it's impossible for us to do that as long as Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urick, the original prosecutors who framed me for a crime I didn't commit, are still so actively engaged in litigation in this case. It's going to be impossible for us to do that, number one. Number two, we've done so much to push for DNA testing over the years. Myself, obviously, my family supporting me, Justin Brown, Miss Erica Suter, Mr. Brown. So the only thing we can do at this point right now, we know that there was male DNA found on the shoes that Hae was reported to have been wearing when she left school, that were not found with her when she was found, and that were found in her car. And it was the middle of winter. It's just, I don't know, it's just unimaginable that Hae wouldn't be wearing shoes in her car in the middle of winter. So from what we know, and I don't know, maybe someone else knows, we don't know if there's been any additional DNA testing done on those shoes or on any evidence that was collected in this case. And so the point, and the reason why we don't know if it's been done is because of these legal proceedings. Because of these legal proceedings, everything stops. Whatever the investigation was, that stopped. Because now all the attention is placed on what's going on in court. So to answer your question, how do these proceedings affect the true investigation into what happened to Hae? Number one, it prevents me or my family or my attorneys from establishing that I had nothing to do with Hae's murder, number one. Number two, it prevents an ongoing investigation or a complete reinvestigation of this case from the beginning, interviewing everyone involved, including me, about what happened, what didn't happen, where a person was, to get to the bottom of what happened with regards to who is responsible for Hae's murder. And then the last thing I'll say is moving forward with this DNA testing. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's that's essentially what we're arguing, that we'll never get to find justice for Hae as long as Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urick are continuing to be involved in this case, whether directly or indirectly, because they're incentivized to protect that conviction, because not protecting that conviction could have detrimental consequences for their law licenses, at the very least, with regards to professionally what can happen.
Just to follow up, there's a lot of big players that you named here. Do you worry that politics is going to get in the way or distract from really getting to the bottom of it, or is that what you're kind of trying to point out, that is the problem to begin with?
No, so I'm not, and I appreciate the question. I did mention some names, like you said. I just think that it's important, and I wish people would recognize that everything that I said, I did my best to provide evidence for. So it's not me casting aspersions or just slandering anyone's character. I did my absolute best to present information that has people's names attached to it, and this is stuff that they submitted, number one. Number two, I don't know if I can really speak to you like the politics of it. I don't know. I've always just been in prison. Maybe you guys have a better idea of if that occurred or if it didn't. For me and my family, all that we know is that we've worked so hard, and we're so grateful for everyone who supported us and just stood by us over all these years. And we're just trying so hard. And it's like we're just scraping together. It's the most difficult thing in the world, and I don't know if people realize this. Like, for us to get a cell phone expert, we had to depend on someone to donate some money, then we had to collect that money, then we had to find a cell phone expert, who, not so much that he was charging money, but that he needed money to conduct the tests and the research that he had to do, or to find a private investigator. And this stuff is very expensive. So, and then we have attorneys who are basically, they're working to take care of their families. They're basically taking like pennies on the dollar because they believe in this case, they believe that I'm innocent. And it's just the most difficult thing in the world. And to look at Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urich, they're using the police department. They're using the FBI. They're using the attorney. They just have multi-millions of dollars worth of resources to do what they're doing. And we're just scraping by, trying to scrape together pennies to be able to do this. And it's just the most difficult and frustrating thing in the world. So I can't really speak to, you know, like what you were asking about politics, because I've always just been in prison. I don't know what's going on the outside. But what we know is that that's why we're just asking for an investigation. I think that if you have, and maybe this will kind of answer the question, I think if you have two opposing people, and their relationship is adversarial in nature. So for example, Kathleen Murphy and Kevin Urich, they're saying that I'm responsible for this. I'm saying that I'm not. I'm asking for an we're asking for an investigation. We're asking for as many people as possible to look into this case because we have nothing to hide. And on the other hand, they're essentially saying, no more investigation, don't look at anything, just take our word for it, he did it. I think that if the situation was different and if you had two people come to you, one person said, look, this is the situation, I want you to look into it, examine all the facts, come to your own conclusion, and the other person said, no, don't look into it, you're not entitled to look at the evidence, you're not entitled to look at the information, we have no comment on any of this, just believe us. I think any rational person would say, that doesn't make any sense. So what we've always said, we've been open, we've been transparent. I know this is the first time I've spoken to the media, like taking questions, but a lot of people don't know that I was really fortunate when Ms. Koenig decided to investigate this case and to do a podcast on it. I spent almost, I would say, 1.5 to 2 years on recorded phone calls in prison talking to her. She asked me any and every single question you guys could ever think of if you had a whole 1.5 about this case. And and I told her from the very beginning, I'll answer any question as best as I can. If I don't have an answer, I just don't have one. And all this was on recorded conversations. And the previous Attorney General's office subpoenaed those records in between 2016 and 20. So they have that. When Miss Amy Berg, an amazing person who made a decision to do a documentary about this case, I spent almost 3 years talking to her on recorded phone conversations. She asked me every single question Miss Koenig asked me, and then even more. Any single question. So there's 3 years worth of recorded conversations. Those records were subpoenaed by the Attorney General, the previous Attorney General's office. So they have all that. So I've always been open and transparent as much as I possibly could be because I have nothing to hide. And I know that in my heart, the more people that investigate this case, the more people that look at this, the more DNA testing we can do, I know that hopefully we'll come to the point of your question earlier, is that who is responsible for Hae's murder? And that person should spend time being held accountable for it.
Did you have any idea who may have killed her?
No, sir, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Mr. Syed, if Urich and Murphy have moved on to other jurisdictions, and if this happened to you, since prosecutorial conduct, you have been a victim of it since you were 17, and it continues allegedly to this day, is there a warning to other people statewide that this could happen to them?
I mean, yes, ma'am. I think that, I guess on like a larger level conversation to be had is that just as a society, you know, like at what point, and I appreciate the doctrine of qualified immunity. I may respectfully disagree with it, but I understand when you have prosecutors in a society, you know, if anyone can just file a lawsuit against a prosecutor, then everyone would file a lawsuit against a prosecutor, and you wouldn't have functionability in society. That there are people who commit crimes, there are people who harm people and who break the law, and they need to be held accountable. So while I disagree with the fundamental scope of qualified immunity, I understand that there is a need for something. What we're asking for essentially is that if there is a case or a series of cases where a citizen can show and they can prove that he or she or their rights were violated repeatedly by someone, we're just asking that at least a fair and unbiased and impartial investigation should be looked into. It should be conducted. That's all that we're asking for. We're not asking for, to be clear, we're not asking for the Attorney General's office to make an announcement. We're not asking for Mr. Brown to say or do anything, like publicly or anything like that. We're just, as a family, we're submitting this request to him. We're submitting the evidence to him. And we believe and we've seen him stand up for Maryland families We're just asking that he please consider that in this case here, our rights as a family were violated. And we tried to provide, we're really fortunate that the material I provided is all open source material. You can go online, you can go on the internet, and you can get the material yourself. So we just provided those cases to show that there are other Maryland families who have been affected by this. And it's reasonable to conclude that if there was an investigation into those cases, what I benefited from the most throughout this whole process is the attention it drew people to investigate. And that's what so many people in prison, they lack the resources. They lack the resources. So that's, to answer your question, ma'am, that I don't know about like a broader discussion about this, but we just as a family, we're just asking the Attorney General to just please be willing to consider looking into this.
Thank you.
Mr. Syed,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Regarding your slide about the source of the information on the note with the Brady violation.
Yes, sir.
You said that they submitted an affidavit and that it was given to a private investigator and is in the custody of an attorney.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what's going to happen next with that affidavit? Do you expect it to be part of the legal proceedings or?
No, and thank you for the question. Yeah, no. So I actually don't know. That's a situation that doesn't involve us, like as a family or anything like that. I don't know how that is going to play out. It's only been told to me that what the affidavit states, that it was handed to a private investigator from a very well-respected private investigative agency, and it was given it's in the custody of an attorney who's a very well-respected attorney. So however that decides to play out, I don't know about that. But we just know that it does exist, and it demonstrates the third time in this pattern of behavior when Mr. Urick, he lies and misleads the court, presents misleading testimony or misled his witness. And the first time, Asia McClain came forward, provided an affidavit proving that he lied. The second time, Abe Baranowitz came forward and provided an affidavit to prove that he lied. And now this person, who was a source of the information, they've come forward, provided an affidavit proving that he was lying again.
Mr. Syed, who's the attorney that has that affidavit?
I can't disclose that. Even if I did know, I'm not saying I do or don't know, but that's not for me or our family to know or to talk about or anything like that. We've been told that it exists, and the people involved are very respected. They're very honest people, So that's the only thing that I know of or could say to you.
Do you have any insight into who was paying for the private investigator and just how they came to get the affidavit?
I can't. Yeah, I don't. That's not. Yeah, I don't. I hopefully that'll be found out later or whatever. But we do know, and we believe it fits the pattern of behavior, and that this is a person who we've been told is a very credible person, similar to Asia McClain, similar to Abe Baranowitz. They have no reason to lie. I think I don't know if you guys remember when the Court of Special Appeals, I believe they described, and I could be wrong, but they described Asia McClain as a disinterested witness. And that's a legal term. A disinterested, like for example, my younger brother, he's an interested witness. He's my brother. A disinterested witness is someone who has no connection to the case, except for the fact that they have information pertaining to the case. That this person has no connection to the defendant, it has no connection to whoever the potential victim or victims in the case. A disinterested